Good morning, everybody. Going to try to catch up a couple minutes here, keep us on schedule, and hopefully have a little bit touching on a few different levels. If you guys are data ninjas and really have got your data-driven approach all in line, hopefully there's still little tidbits for you. But for folks who may still be new to gamification, still scoping it out, still looking to deploy something in the space, hopefully a few very basic concepts that through deploying gamification loyalty programs at Yamaha, we've picked up over a couple years now. So kind of one of those always evolving, always learning sort of things. I would stop short right at the front of the presentation of saying we've got it down perfectly. So there's a lot of lessons learned in here, a lot of things that if we had known a couple years ago would put us in a better place today. But that being said, we'll hop right into it, and hopefully there's a little bit of something for everybody here. So first of all, kind of a concept maybe to bracket everything here. Has anybody been to Mexico? Okay. It looks like there's a whole bunch of stuff to do in Mexico. Wow, look at all that land. I decided to go from there, where I live, to there, Ensenada. And I decided to do that with my fiance on a cruise ship. Any people out there been on a cruise ship to Mexico? Yeah, actually a couple even. So, there's a lot to do on the cruise ship. When you're on the cruise ship, a lot of our time we were spending at the back of the ship here, hanging out, doing cruise ship sort of things. She was tanning, playing slot machines, and petting horses when we went for our excursion. I was sunburning, watching her play slot machines and riding the horses. Ultimately, though, we both were going to the same place, doing the same thing, and having completely different interests and kind of sub-journeys along the way. Thinking back to that huge map of Mexico. I went to Mexico. Well, I actually didn't go very far in the grand scheme of things. And really, in that even concept, I went to Mexico. Along the way, obviously, lots of other things happened. I think what, in retrospect, we've really been able to pick up in our particular loyalty and gamification program is don't think about it as a loyalty and gamification program in a silo and stop there. This is about kind of that earn and burn. I like that. If you just stop there, I think you stop there. There's that other yearn that was great this morning, I think Barry pointed out as this other big next thing coming. I would argue that you're not going to be able to really get to that big next thing and really drive and be able to shift and optimize and get to where you need to be in the future unless you really think about all of those touch points, every single path within that general space and zone of loyalty where you possibly could have some insights and things, data points, that you're leaving latent, just kind of sitting there. So if you're early on in that flow and thinking about gathering data to go back and pitch to senior management, hey, I need this budget, this thing's great, all these people are telling all these great stories about how it's really had a positive ROI, it's great for branding, so on and so forth. If there was one takeaway from today, really want to urge that you think about step one, not just, oh, you people get coins, they get these things. Along that way, just as the trip to Mexico was pretty simple, I went to Mexico on a ship and we came back. Lots of different things happen along the way, and each one of those touch points can be measured. So, one concept and kind of phrase, I used this actually last year in a slightly different presentation at GSummit. This concept of data being data. I think back in the olden days of the interwebs, so like 3 years ago, I guess, 4 years ago, CRM is CRM. We've got web analytics over here. There's this bolt-on loyalty program that we're doing. That's over here. And these things weren't really that interconnected. Oh, and they're social, but that's way over there. There's no way we're going to have that touch over here. There's no reason to be continuing to think that way. And with a little bit of thought and planning at the beginning of deploying a gamification strategy or program, And certainly, taking some time if you have an existing program, I would argue that there are bits and pieces that you're still missing if you really step back and look at all of those behaviors. So again, the concept put forth earlier around being able to pull those levers, flip the switches, and derive more value out of the program, this is how you would be able to approach and do that. So there's the web data, which generally tends to be behavioral sort of data, demographic data, that a great example again this morning of pulling that through swarms and swarms and piles of social data, looking at sentiment analysis, looking at what sort of words and keywords, and the game data itself. Instead of thinking those as disparate data sources or special or unique unto themselves, ultimately start bringing those together to be able to say, yes, we were able to then do these business sort of things. I would argue that as you start to combine these business sort of things, that's where you can hopefully find where that next step is to move to not just earn and burn, but how do you get to yearn? Where are we really seeing interesting things pop out in conversions and sales? Where are we seeing support costs possibly coming down because we've taken gamification data and been able to pull that into customer support agents so that they now have more information about this customer and can handle cases more quickly? So, in a nutshell, kind of the takeaway slide from all of this, then on the how to do this, make sure that you know and have an ability to flag or segment out active users. So we happen to use Big Door as our platform for gamification. They have a pretty clear-cut way of saying, here's the chunk that gets it, here's the chunk that doesn't, here's the comparison and various measures between those two. I believe most of the vendors you'd go to or most developers that are wiring this for you probably would understand the concept, but I have spoken to a few folks who missed that step. That's obviously a major key. If you can't flag that here are the people that are active in a loyalty program and here are the people that aren't, that's going to be really hard to say whether it's doing good or not. I think CRM, sales data, connecting all this data in general, and kind of the nutshell statement, don't operate loyalty in a silo. It's not this thing over there. It is the thing. There were tweets out earlier on, well, where's the distinction in the line between loyalty and gamification and marketing? I would argue the lines are getting quite blurred. So in our framework, in one kind of basic example, we have apps, we have the web, we have social, we have emails that we're sending out from CRM, we have loyalty and gamification as a concept, but we've really tried to, wherever and however we can, get at not breaking it out as its own special thing. It is great, it is a discipline that should be studied, there's a lot of unique aspects to it, but breaking it out is probably not the best route from really being able to drive it from a business standpoint. I'd add one big key is making sure that those web analytics hooks are across the entire framework. We'll talk to that point in a moment. So these are actually some true statements for Yamaha's instance. A few numbers, and I'll point them out when they come up, are just samples. These are actually real. So our user sign-in, people who are active in the loyalty program, 45% higher than the people who are not. 4% more monthly visits versus people who are not, so a loyalty or recency sort of measure. Activity on site, particularly with social sharing, that's really where a lot of the rewarded earn activities come in our particular instance. So when we look at the systems that are telling us that, single sign-on system, we use Janrain for people being able to sign in with Facebook or Google or LinkedIn, whatever it may be. That's where we're really able to connect that with Google Analytics and to some extent with Big Door to look at, yeah, that's 45%. That's boosting people, the likelihood that someone's registering, someone's signing in. The gamification piece being added, being tweaked, when we move it over here, we're seeing changes over here. So pretty easy to start to see that's one potential value of loyalty, giving people a reason to sign in, keeping them signed in, keeping them active. So if you've got no budget and a very, very basic program, one thing that we've been able to do to really drive some interesting kind of little optimization projects. It's just setting up a custom segment in Google. So if people are landing on a particular onboarding page, if there's a URL that you know they're only going to hit through a gamification program, easy peasy to go and do free Google Analytics and say if they hit that page, they're in a custom segment. You further could combine if people have 15 pages in a visit versus 5. What's the overlap of people with 15 to people that went to that onboarding page? Free, relatively easy. It's not rocket surgery, just something to start thinking about as a way to further build on what you may be getting built in the off-the-shelf or bolt-on sort of gamification program. Here are some ones that we've started playing with lately. The YouTube is not an actual stat, but is one that we're kind of playing with, figuring out how we would get to be able to measure. For various reasons, we're actually not hosting videos through our gamification on YouTube right now. But the theory being, if you did, through a quest, which is something Big Door does a lot of, I think most of the platforms that you would be able to talk to the vendors downstairs offer this sort of thing. So essentially, if you go through this path, on-site and off-site, as you're hitting these checkpoints, you're earning things. If those checkpoints veer into social land and or watching videos, you should be able to then bring it back around to YouTube views going up, even SEO. If there's a page that you're rewarding people for checking out links, now you've got links from your site to external sites and vice versa. They've got to come back. Facebook likes, rewarding people for liking your page. That's a built-in function, again, on Big Door's platform. So these sort of quests we've seen great results with, and not just we really want people to do this thing because it's going to get us more money and I might get a raise, but Yamaha being a musical instrument company, and a lot of what we invest our time and money in is music advocacy. So there's great stories that we can tell here and not be limited to just our proper product brand website, which obviously people get that we're going to be biased. We can get them out in social land, and here's a video produced by a junior high school or high school that thinks Yamaha is the greatest, and slightly reward them for going to watch that video. Concepts like that, and making sure that while you're popping them over through these quests, you're looking at that performance and not leaving that data on the table. So these checkpoints, again, if you're really curious, you can check with Big Door. They can walk you through. Here was an early example where we are actually testing now with a YouTube video in this flow so that we can see what percentage came with this referrer from this source versus just organic. So Facebook Insights, Big Door, Moz, if you're tracking on the SEO side, SEM Rush, there's a bunch of platforms on the SEO side. Again, most of them are free or pretty darn close to free, but when you start to combine them with the previously separated out, when we started, we weren't really looking at it this holistically. When you start to combine the data is where it gets interesting. This starts to possibly veer on spooky. So you've got to be careful here, and I'll explain a bit more what I mean. So possibly doing this same approach writ large and writ very, very, very small down to individual users. And this may tie back around to that yearn point. When you're down at the individual user attaching your brand to their personal brand, it would be great to know as much as possible about what their personal brand is. I would argue that done right, and with the right intentions, you could plausibly get down to knowing Bob likes pink. And if you thought about it long enough, there's probably some reason that you could come up with. You probably would actually come up with the reason first, instead of figuring out, here's a data point, let me find what I can do with it. But if you did think about it for a second, if you knew particular customers really liked a particular color, there's interesting things you could do with that. If you knew that particular users tend to be more active on the weekend versus the weekday, okay, well that's when we're going to send transactional emails or marketing emails. That's when we're going to make sure to post on the channel that Sally likes, which we happen to know is Pinterest, and we know she likes pink. we know Jane is pregnant. Depending on the vertical you're in, that might be very, very valuable data. So that's not a Yamaha thing that we know people are pregnant yet because of our gamification program. But Target sure does. So I don't know if you've read this article, but they were able to look at purchase history and determine that, Jane purchased a bunch of calcium, lotion, and cotton balls in a particular time frame and over-indexed what the average combo would be there, and was able to actually figure out that a teen girl was pregnant before her father did. Not necessarily good that this happened in this particular case. If you read the story, it's on Forbes. But the point being, getting to that level of understanding and knowledge and awareness of customers, there's interesting things that start to open up. So instead of saying, well, we're giving coins to people and then they get a shirt, we give them coins and they feel good about themselves. Great. I would argue that taking that to the next level and being able to say, wow, now there's really actionable things we can continue to do and layer on top of that. Whether you say that's a loyalty function, a gamification function, or marketing, I don't know that it really necessarily matters. If you can do it as a business, that's probably good. And it's fairly easy to do. The difficulty is in having the discipline to do it. And in our case, I'll be the first to step out there. We did not do this on day 1. We're not 100% doing it on day 600. But we see that there's value in this, and we've had a lot of wins along the way that we'll continue to do this and continue to get better and evolve, hopefully along with the rest of you. So just super quickly, can't stress enough, whatever analytics platform you're using, we actually use Omniture for some things that we're tracking and Google Analytics for others. If you have no budget, use Google Analytics and set up those custom segments. Start to compare at some level. Even if you kind of home brew your own loyalty program and you're not using one of the vendors downstairs that generally have an okay analytics program and dashboard you can look at, you can do a lot of that on your own in Google Analytics and layer on top of theirs. Facebook Insights, Twitter Analytics now is getting much better. For a long time, there really was no Twitter Analytics. We use Unified and Agora Manager. There's thousands of these out there to track on the social side. We just happen to like these. They work for us. And again, we have to think it out. We can't just say, oh, our likes went up, so it must be because of loyalty. We have gone as far as, let's put a landing page on a tab on a Facebook page and then be able to go into Facebook Insights and know that that traffic really only got there from this particular gamified program or loyalty campaign or whatever it may be. So kind of thinking it out. How would you then verify and be able to segment these folks out? Also, just a quick plug on the email side, whatever client you may be using, we've had a lot of luck and some extra cool bonus stuff using Litmus. They're not free, but really reasonably priced. Another layer of email analytics. So this really gets down to an engagement on email. So not just open, but how long, how far scrolled, did they forward, did they click? And that data has been surprisingly helpful for us as well, tied all the way back through gamification, determining whether we're going to send transactional emails every time someone hits a new XP level or not. Well, we can now see whether they really care. They might have opened, but they're just opening it so it doesn't show as an open email, and they're just really anal about making sure they don't have any unread emails on their iPhone. So this then lets us know, do they really care? So anyways, Moz, kind of on the SEO side, there's a bunch out there. And at the end of the day, as best as you can do, making sure all this data is coming back to one single place to look at from the aggregate level, this is really where you'd look at monthly active, weekly active, and those sorts of things at a high level would be more like in a Salesforce where you'd look across all records. So kind of the takeaway here, it's not just about having or getting the tools, but really about making sure from the very, very start, you're thinking about how to better connect these and really literally connect them, or at least get to a point where you can pull the data to one place to do that analysis. We've really found it to be that kind of 2 + 2 = 5 scenario, we've got this data, but once we combine it in interesting ways, interesting stuff comes out. So that's what I've got, and I'm more than happy to nerd out on more analytics and tech talk after the presentation, but we'll go ahead and keep it flowing so the next presenter has enough time to keep us on track. Thanks, everyone.